Naughty Dog's The Last of Us has now seen success not just through video games, but now also through television and HBO's TV show Adaptation created by Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann. And in this video essay, I want to highlight the differences in interactivity and how its absence in the medium of the show highlights such interactions in the game. Both mediums are quite different, but they deliver the same compelling story. As methods of storytelling, the game is interactive, whereas the TV show adaptation completely lacks that interactivity. With such difference, some things can get lost in translation, but it can also open the door for other opportunities to expand on the story and do things that the game could not. Both mediums have their strengths and areas of overlap. This idea is something that writer and creative director of the games, and writer and executive producer of the show, Neil Druckmann, has said himself.
He kind of like would encourage me to actually, let's not change it. There's no need to change like this scene or this bit of dialogue. It just would work as well in this passive medium. And then there are other things that, again, were really strong in this interactive medium that would not work as well for the show. And those...
I think the very first episode of the show highlights this idea perfectly. The game's prologue is revered as one of the greatest in video game history. You play as Sarah, the loving daughter of the main character Joel, and through this young child's perspective, you truly feel the world around you beginning to fall apart. Playing as Sarah makes what happens to her so much more impactful. As the player, we are the ones hiding behind Joel for safety when the infected neighbor breaks through the glass door. We are in the back of the truck, afraid, only able to watch as the world as we know it crumbles around us. Despite not spending a lot of time with the character, little lines of dialogue also allow us to become attached to this character and to resonate with her emotions. When we witness Joel shoot the neighbor,
You shot him.
Sarah.
I saw him this morning.
Listen to me.
when Joe tells us to not stop to help the family on the side of the road.
Let's see what they need.
What do you think you're doing? Keep driving.
I got a kid, Joe. So do we.
But we have room.
Keep driving, Tommy.
I see what I see. Someone else will come along.
You should have helped him.
All the way to dialogue like this, said with quivering breaths.
Those people are on fire.
Don't look, Sarah.
And by the end of the prologue, after having that sense of control and perspective from Sarah ripped away from us permanently, makes her gruesome death that much more tragic.
Sir, there's a little girl. But... Yes, sir.
Listen, buddy, we've just been through hell. Okay, we just need... Shit. Please don't. Oh, no. Sarah. Move your hands, baby. I know, baby, I know. Listen to me, I know this hurts, baby. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. All right, I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby, I know it hurts. Come on, baby, please. I know, baby, I know. Sarah. Baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Come on. No. No. No, no, no. Please. 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 Please don't. Please.
And then it cuts to the title screen. And we are given time to process and space to breathe before jumping back into the game. And I want to mention, I think it's extremely important to have this title screen for the story too, because it gives the player a break and ensures that we aren't occupied with all of this emotion about Sarah's death when moving on into the next portion of the game. It would take away from the story of Joel that follows if we jumped immediately into this next part as a participating player in the story, and it would threaten the player experience by not seeking to pace itself after such a heavy event. But what I wanted to highlight here regarding its comparison to the show is how the show is able to expand on that and is able to deliver the viewer an attachment to this character in a different way and do so effectively despite there being no interactivity. And I think because there is no interactivity, it's more than justified for us to spend more time with Sarah than the game's prologue did. Activities like going about monotonous tasks like school, getting Joel's watch fixed at the shop, and going over to the elderly neighbor's house to bake cookies we don't like simply wouldn't fit in the interactive setting of video game storytelling. Because this is a more passive setting, such events are able to be utilized in capturing the unfolding of the horrors of the world of The Last of Us. And we still feel a similar level of attachment to and emotional resonance with the character by watching as she does such normal, everyday things. Something additional to note is the show's camera work. We are also given a similar experience that the game delivers, where we experience the events through the perspective of Sarah. The handheld camera from her perspective in the back of the truck allows us to feel more immersed in the story and gives a better feel for her perspective. This exact instance directly displays that the TV show does what the game did well, only without interactivity. It immerses us, the consumers of this media, in the world of The Last of Us. Generally speaking, I think perspective and immersion go hand in hand, and for a game as a medium to tell stories, I think anchored perspectives are all the more important to personal, emotional investment in a character or story. What I mean by this is, for a video game, if as players we were to frequently switch between controlling a bunch of different characters, it would be a lot harder to find ourselves feeling particularly attached to any of them, as opposed to sticking to controlling a single character because it's a game. We are meant to play it and have some sort of control or agency in what we do. If the main characters are so crucial to the story like they are in The Last of Us, we need to be invested, and by allowing us to control the same one or two main characters and spend most, if not all of our time with them, that emotional attachment is easier to establish than if we were to jump between the entire cast of side characters during a playthrough. The show doesn't have to struggle with this task though, as there is no controlling the characters, it's simply the visual telling of the story. And on the contrary, for a TV show as a medium for storytelling, it can be even better to not stick to holding the same one or two perspectives throughout. I think the ideal example of this is episode 3, Long Time. In this episode, Joel and Ellie are on their way to meet Bill and Frank, but we take a time jump to the early days of the outbreak and meet Bill, a paranoid survivalist. Throughout this episode, for nearly its entirety, we watch the story of Bill and Frank, and it's a beautiful story of love post-apocalypse amidst all the chaos in the world of the infected. Symbolism is blatantly planted everywhere, in things like Frank pointing out how dusty Bill's dining room is, to a later shot of potted flowers now full of life, blossoming and symbolizing the happiness and love being nurtured between the two of them, and Bill embracing emotion, to the dining room returning to what it once was when Joel and Ellie arrive at the end of the episode. But getting back to my point, the episode as a whole is simply a great expansion of the story that the game was unable to tell to completion. Because this is the medium of a TV show, it's not as strict with keeping to individual perspective like the game is, because by contrast, the video game would not have been able to reliably deviate from the story of Joel and Ellie to the story of Bill and Frank like the show was able to. Sure, there are differences. Bill lives to see Joel and Ellie in the game, but in the show, Bill and Frank poetically die together. But such a difference is inconsequential to my point, because practically all of Bill and Frank's relationship was left unexplored in the game, as the developers likely wanted to shy away from fully diving into the perspective of Bill. Like I said, to avoid shifting perspectives and losing the player's personal investment and attachment with Joel, which is completely fair. It would have been much riskier to branch off the story at such a point in the game, as you, the player, want to continue playing as Joel and being Joel. As far as perspective is concerned for the game, you are Joel, and dispatching the control to explore the character of Bill could very likely ruin that sense of player immersion and the player's personal connection to the main character. Don't get me wrong though, it's still possible to see perspective changes work well. I would argue The Last of Us Part 2 does a superb job of this, but I don't want to dive too far off the deep end here and start spoiling for what I expect to see in the show Season 2. But for The Last of Us Part 1, I think it's essential for the game to keep the player in control of Joel, and later Ellie, in order to properly develop the story. And because of this, in the game, Bill's character is left to be fleshed out through game mechanics, like picking up notes to find more information. You can find a note from Frank and give it to Bill in the following cutscene to reveal more background about the two.
Ready? Bill, I found this in there and I figured you should have it.
Well, that's how you feel. Well, fuck you too, Frank. Fucking idiot. You ready to go?
And apart from the notes, the only other pieces of dialogue are given in reference to Frank are one in this conversation.
Look, let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, I had somebody that I cared about. It was a partner. Somebody I had to look after. And in this world, that sort of shit's good for one thing. Getting you killed. So you know what I did? I wisened the fuck up. And I realized it's gotta be just me.
And two, when you find Frank's body.
Furthermore, tell Tess that she could take this job.
Don't you bring Tess into this!
Shove it right up
nothing
her
to do with... Jesus. What, you know this guy or something?
Frank.
Who the hell's Frank?
He was my partner. He's the only idiot that would wear a shirt like that. He's got bites. Here. And
I reckon he didn't want to turn, so he...
yeah, I guess not. Well, fuck him.
But as for the story of Bill and Frank, that's as far as it goes. Merely a branch of the story that is hinted at and moved on from. Now, as for the character of Bill, as with many of the other characters in the game, they are fleshed out through dialogue, and it's not just raw dialogue, where one character is waiting for the other to finish their line, to pause and then begin their own. Something as simple as interrupting the other person in conversation helps prevent the game from having that NPC style of interaction.
Bill, it ain't like that. It's
Bullshit. It is just like that. Hey! What'd I say to you when we walked down the steps? What'd I say?
I'm just fixing your stupid pile.
Don't touch.
It's human, it feels natural, and we get a genuine sense of personality from the characters. Bill might be a bit of a dick, and Ellie can be a bit of a swearer, but dialogue interactions like this allow the characters to be more fleshed out despite being in a video game. They become more than just pixels on a screen, or the forgettable side character meant to help you progress or give you a quest. Another way the show is able to effectively highlight the strength and interactivity of the game is also through the absence of events from the game. In episode 8, When We Are in Need, we see the perspective of Ellie, who has to leave Joel, who is still recovering, to go hunt for food. She shoots a deer and tracks the wounded animal, encountering the preacher David and his fellow hunter James, who are both hunting for food for their own group. David offers to trade the deer Ellie shot for some penicillin for Joel, and he sends for James to go retrieve some. The two set up temporary camp in an old shed nearby. Up until this point, the episode plays out exactly how the game did, but after taking shelter in the shed and some standoffish conversation, in the game you get attacked by a bunch of infected, and you and David are forced to work together to fend off the horde. In the show, there is no need for this immersive interaction of fighting off zombies. Such an event was one for the games, and stayed in the games because of it. The passive medium of television has no need for something like that. In the game, it functions well in keeping the player engaged in the story. The player doesn't simply have to sit there and watch Ellie and David talk. They get to be a part of the events that follow. Puzzles are also something that are used in the game for the sake of interaction and engagement that are pretty much entirely omitted in the show. You constantly need Ellie's help to climb things, so you pull the classic,
Alright, come here. Give me your foot.
and if I recall correctly, we don't see any of that happen in the show until the very end. But I think the action carries the same meaning in both the show and the game. It shows how they need each other, specifically in these instances to fix these puzzles, but also beyond that. It speaks to Joel and Ellie needing each other to progress, to grow, to move forward. Regarding the show saving this happening for the very last episode, I think it's just another way to not only call back to the games, but also to show how far the relationship between Joel and Ellie has grown. The rich story of The Last of Us truly is remarkable, and I'm so glad that the TV show adaptation has seemingly managed to break the video game curse, high hopes for season 2, and allowed me to make a video like this. There's plenty that I think could have been done better in the show, but I wanted to focus this video on the contrast of the game to the show, and not simply just all the story differences, including the ones I disliked. Perhaps in the future, though. Thank you for watching.
Well, better than nothing. Oh, I'm sure your friend will be missing this tonight. It's light on the reading, but it's got some interesting photos.
Now, Ellie, that ain't for kids.
Whoa! How the hell would he even walk around with that thing?
Get rid of that.
Well, hold your horses. I want to see what all the fuss is about. Oh, why are these all stuck together? I'm just fucking with you. Bye-bye!